Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Delaware County Board of Elections Board meeting for April 30th, 2024. Can we all please rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we start, I just want to apologize for the delay. We are going to be taking testimony from some witnesses today related to provisional ballot no count challenges. And so we are waiting for the court reporter who will be joining us on via the internets. And when that court reporter joins, we will stop whatever our present proceedings are and turn to that testimony so that the witnesses can continue with their work days. And I also want to note that I think the agenda, I don't know if it's aspirational, Mr. Allen, but the agenda needs to be amended to say 2024. Okay. With that, let's otherwise consider the agenda, please.
So there's the consideration of the agenda itself, public comment. I do not see any members of the public here for that.
You know, let's confirm right now. Do we have any public comment? This is the public comment period. I know you're going to be giving testimony, but that's different. Okay. No public comment. So we'll consider that checked off. Thank you.
I'll give the director's report, then board member comments regarding the election, and then consideration of the recommendations on provisional ballots and the consideration of any objections to those recommendations on provisional ballots. That's the main reason we're here today. The authorization, we need the board to authorize myself to sign and report the unofficial election results to the Department of State. There's a deadline of close of business the Tuesday after Election Day, which is today. So we need that done. There are no campaign finance waiver requests, so we'll be able to skip over that item. And then the status report on any potential recounts or close contests. Our next meeting date is penciled in for May 7th to certify the results of the April 23rd, 2024 primary. We have no minutes to consider at this time.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Allen. Then would you please proceed with the Director of Elections report?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Board of Elections. We had, by all measures, our most successful election yet. Of course, the turnout was low here and across the state, with a few rural counties were the outliers with 35–37%. But as I often say, you prepare the party so that you can accommodate every single guest, in this case, our registered voters. But you run with the turnout, whether it's 25% or 40% or 60%. So we ended up around 23%. Roughly 95,000 voters participated in this, a little less than that. This was our first time with the poll pads, the electronic poll books, which offer a myriad of services to the poll workers and the voters. And they provide uniformity and consistency in terms of instructions for all voter situations. So this time we had to program 506 poll pads. In some cases, we have 2 and even 3 for our supersized precincts. Overall, the feedback, once again, was extremely positive. We did, just for the public's knowledge, 168 precincts last fall. That went so well that this board and the county council advised us to go ahead and do 100% of the precincts at this primary, so that every precinct had some familiarity with this technology before the presidential election in November. I want to commend the board on that recommendation because it certainly worked out really well. We did find a couple of minor, and I want to emphasize very minor, wrinkles. But all of which can be addressed ahead of the fall. Also, the pickup, the drop off, the performance of all 4 divisions, the warehouse, voter registration, the mail absentee operations at the Union Power Plant, the poll worker training and voter service center operation here at the government center, everything went exceptionally well. We had very, very minor and few complaints or concerns to address. Election night, we did our best ever with election results from 90, more than 90, about 93% of both the precincts themselves and the mail and absentee ballots by 11 o'clock. So the only items that came in after 11 o'clock were a handful, I want to say 6 or 8 straggler precincts who were late to arrive here at the government center for drop off. And then the last batch of mail ballots, which included the mail that arrived Tuesday before 8 p.m., as well as the drop boxes from the drop boxes, which were sealed up at 8 p.m. That took a little longer than I anticipated or would want, and we're going to try to refine that because those last 2,000 or 2,400 vote by mail ballots, even though they were in at the Union Power Plant from the drop boxes before 9 p.m., those took until about 1:30 to get those into the counts. So we're going to try to make that a little more orderly because we had the 28,000 we had about 30,000 returned, and we had about 28,000 of them in the counts reported to the public shortly after 8 p.m. So we're hoping to improve our performance for the fall. The new design of envelopes, the outer envelope for mail and absentee ballots, and most importantly, the secrecy envelope, which was now yellow. And even though you're only allowed to have the words official election ballot, it had it about 50 times in a diagonal pattern. So it was kind of like a bumblebee color of black and yellow. And it really stood out when they were processing the envelopes. It stood out clearly to the voters because we had a pronounced reduction in the number of naked ballots that came back, which is good because we saw, even though we had a low turnout, we had new and what appeared to be first-time users of mail and absentee ballots. There were big drives by the Republican Party to promote vote by mail for this election and the next election. So to see first-time voters successfully deploy that secrecy envelope, that was good. So I want to also thank the Park Police facilities, public relations, the county administration, emergency services, the sheriff's department, the IT department in particular, which helped us with a backup system for the wharf for the fiber optic connection. So we're even more prepared than ever before, whether it's a power outage or in this case, fiber optic connection, help on election day with election results, and also preparation of the poll pads down in voter registration with completing the logic inaccuracy and the final syncing of the poll pads. Controller's office has also been very helpful because we increased our program or boosted our program for having more county workers assist us at both here in the government center for drop-offs and at the Union Power Plant. And they helped us create and refine the paperwork for that so that those people are going to be able to get paid. And lastly, we received very late for this election, an election assistance commission grant for $45,000. And it's not going to cover the cost, but it'll definitely offset some of the costs of recruiting college and university and other secondary education institutions, students from these institutions to work on election day. Now, as it was, April 23rd fell on the week of final exams for many of our colleges and universities. But Newman University, big tip of the cap to them. We had a huge showing of Newman University students at the Union Power Plant. We were arguably overstaffed, but nonetheless, I hope to invite a representative of Newman for the certification meeting because they went above and beyond. They had a number of students signed up. It was great to have that many additional staff ready to handle whatever we were going to have to handle at the Union Power Plant. And that bodes well for the fall. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to go in reverse order. I voted UP3, and we had 2 of the college students through the program at our precinct, and they were, apparently the judge of elections was very concerned that they were overstaffed, and what are we going to do with these 2 extra people? And universally, and actually made a complaint to Pam, we don't need them, send them somewhere. They were so joyous and enthusiastic and helpful. And of course, I was reported very great with the new technology. And it was, I think, rejuvenating for all the poll workers who go through a long day. And particularly when they're a little bit disappointed at the low turnout, that to have people who are excited about elections and about to enter into that phase of life where hopefully for the next 80 years, they'll be voting regularly and helping us with the polls. So that was a really exciting program. The Newman students at the wharf during the count were as happy as you could see. So thank you, Jim, for making sure that we get people engaged in our elections early, and thank you to Newman for particularly going above and beyond in their support. I also overall just want to thank everybody for what was an incredibly smooth election. I consider, I don't know if I've put this on myself, I don't think it's statutorily required, and Mr. Parks can confirm, but I like to spend election day going around to precincts and just checking in our supervisory capacity on how things are going. And in particular, I like to be sent to ones where they're having problems. And I think I asked about 10 times throughout the day, both Mr. Parks and Mr. Allen, whether there were any precincts I needed to be sent to. And there just weren't any that were having the type of problems that required that level of supervision. So I got to experience some of the little nits about poll pads. And I have to tell you, it's funny. The first one I went to, they said, well, it's really strange. I don't understand why the company would make the base of the poll pad where the receipt or the ticket comes out not connected to the charger. So when you put the poll pad on, it doesn't charge. You have to separately plug it in. And I thought that was really odd and didn't make sense, even though I'm not a techie. I don't know if I'm explaining it well. Anyway, the next poll precinct I went to, they were like, I asked, hey, have you had problems with charging the poll pads? They're like, no, it totally charges. So it's just people learning new technology. And a lot of it was that type of little thing that actually isn't even an issue. They just need to understand it further. So it was great that we were able to do this before the general election when we expect obviously a lot more activity. And so thank you to everybody on all of the teams and all of the county departments and the police, park police, et cetera, who just made this a really smooth election. It was a pleasure to be able to watch and not have crises. That was wonderful. So thank you, Mr. McBlain.
I'll just echo your comments and those of Mr. Allen. I thought it was a very smooth election.
Mr. Alberts.
Well, my experience is a little unique. It's probably the first election in my adult life where I wasn't going from poll to poll on election day due to the coincidence with Passover. But I've been voting by mail since it's become available. And I think it's probably, in addition to efforts by parties to encourage people to do this, I think that's also partly a reason for the perhaps increase of new first-time mail-in voters. So mail-in voting works. I like it. I'm a fan. I did miss the opportunity to go around and, as you say, in our supervisory role, make the rounds and kind of check in real time to see what was going on. But I did not hear anything out of the ordinary from, my barrage of texts that I continued to receive in any case. So it seems like it was very, very well done. And I'm looking forward to seeing these poll pads in action in November.
Before I forget to mention, Pam Lairdson and Tony Oriente and a couple of other key individuals who helped out with the training program in this room, sometimes 50, sometimes 90 judges and majority and minority inspectors, clerks, what have you, in here training on poll pads. They did an excellent job. And I don't want to say that it was all sunshine and rainbows. There were a number of calls that they had to take in the morning, but I'm confident, reasonably confident, that a lot of those were first-time experience type little items, like how do I get the screen back on? And it was just remembering which button to press, or which combination of buttons to press. So there were a lot of calls. But they did handle all of them deftly, and so they were a little exhausted by 10 a.m., but then things kind of leveled off the rest of the day.
And we had that issue with the initial rollout with the first time users, a lot of calls in the morning, usually about, surprise, it's the printers. And within that first conversation, I said, oh, this is how you work through this problem. And then from then on, they were good.
I had one Joe tell me that the screen went blank and they didn't know why. And they called and were told that they just need to go like pull down on it because the brightness must have gotten turned off. I'm like, and another one said, when we flipped the poll pad, we pressed the menu button. And so we went back to the menu and I'm like, okay. I don't know if they called about that, but it was really, I know there were a little bit more technical ones, Mr. Allen, but I mean, if we're talking about some of the calls being that, I think that's a pretty good sign. Mr. Rush, do we have the court reporter yet online?
We can
Okay.
go ahead and proceed and we'll have the recording to send to the court reporter to transcribe, so.
Okay, and then I do want to make sure we take the testimony early, but I also want to make sure that we tee it up. So I do think we need Crystal, Ms. Winterbottom's presentation just of what is that issue so that the testimony makes sense. Okay. Well, I'm glad I'm consistent. Ms. Winterbottom.
Good morning, Crystal Winterbottom, Chief Clerk, Voter Registration. So our provisionals, we had a total of 453. 353, we recommend a full count. 20 of those, we recommend partial count. And 72, we recommend no count. We also had, in addition to those, the 8 challenge that we did recommend originally as a no count. Those 8 are challenged for no judge of elections or minority inspector signatures on the outer provisional envelope. The list that I provided, they are all the voters on those lists by the precinct, and it will say counted, rejected, or partially counted, and they're listed by the precinct. The ones that say unprocessed at this time, they're the 8 challenged on that list. We also broke it down to, let's see, the no count. So there's a list of, since we didn't have as many, it was a quiet election, broke down our no counts. And you can see that the most of our no counts are because there was no ballot. They were spoiled, they were X'd out. They were just voided by the judge of elections. And that was majority of our no counts.
It's great.
I want to commend Crystal and her team, Michelle included, Michelle DeNardis, for getting this down to a science and really efficiently, effectively going through this, and also being flexible in terms of trying to get me lists that we might want to send emails to, what have you, or working with the authorized representatives in this case, and finally for having one of the best slices of banana bread I will ever encounter. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And this list alone of challenges, I think, is significantly smaller than last year, but everything it sounds like is reduced.
Yeah, so because we didn't have as many, we kind of, I guess 400 years ago, we used to take us over a week to review. So we got it down to a 1-day review, and the next day we would start entering in the portal. I know that's not going to be the case for November. But I can now time out that 500 provisionals would take a review 1 full day with challenges. So just trying to plan out next year. So we were able to create these lists. We were able to get them in order and double check our work that we enter in the portal also before we certify them in the SURE system. So each voter gets history for the provisional. We were able to separate these and make these lists.
And does anybody have any questions? What I think I'm going to do is just, Mr. Parks, do you think that you need to make the discussion of the legal issues first, or do we want to take the testimony? I just want to.
Why don't we take the testimony, and I think that could clarify any discussion or questions the board members may have about the legal issues. I can just generally say that the law in Pennsylvania is that if the evidence is that a voter's ballot would not be counted due to solely to the error of an election worker, that is deemed to be an unfair penalty to the voter. And if that's established, then that ballot can be counted, assuming there are no indicia of fraud or other inappropriate, behavior.
Okay, thank you. So does anybody have any questions for Ms. Winterbottom? Because I'm going to tee something up with.
I did. I just had a minor question.
Sure.
There were a couple of precincts where there were 8 provisional ballots. They seem to sort of stand out. I didn't know whether there was a commonality in those or just an over helpful judge of election or
I think that there's one in Newtown, I believe.
Newtown, 5, and then Springfield, 1.
So most of our full counts,
Sorry, I'm reading that wrong. Radnor, 5-2.
so you can't tell by this list, other than when we review the provisionals, we have the print screens on them, and that's how they get reviewed. I can say that most of our full counts are because they had a mail-in ballot or absentee ballot. That was not counted by the Bureau, so we were able to fully count the provisional. That's probably 80-90% of provisionals.
I did have a judge of elections. I asked, I said, why are you doing, they had done 3 provisional. It wasn't many. And I said, why are you having them? And they said that it was mail-in ballot voters who were worried that their ballot wouldn't have been received in time.
Yes.
Any other questions?
No, I just thought that was.
Yeah, it's interesting. Mr. Alberts?
I just, not a question so much, it's just, I know everyone in this room knows what's happening, but for folks watching at home who are not familiar with the process, and sometimes the idea of a challenge is confusing, just to clarify for people watching this, these are ballots that we have determined through some apparent defect or we put them in the no count pile. And the challenges we're about to hear are challenges to our decision to enable these people to vote, not challenges to the validity of the provisional ballot, which might occur in other circumstances.
So they challenged our recommendation of a no count to challenge it as should be full count. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the only issue, and this is where just going quickly is always problematic, because I do want to have, Manley, I do want you to have time on the record, and Shelley, I assume, Ms. Chauncey, I assume you have longer argument, but just so we can cut to the chase, because we have copies of the provisional ballots that the witnesses are going to testify to. The only issue on these provisional ballots, and the witnesses I understand are from Upper Darby 1-5, Upper Darby 4-7, Radnor 5-2, and there's 4 in total, 2 from Radnor, is that the voter completed the provisional ballot, correct?
Correct.
And that you all ran all of the checks on it to make sure that the voter was eligible to vote and there were no indicia of fraud on those ballots?
Correct.
And then unfortunately though, and we'll hear testimony about why, and anybody who's familiar with the chaos of being a judge of elections during an election day may understand how this mistakes can happen. We've seen it last time, just for the judges to know that literally the judge of elections who wrote the book on how to do elections in Delaware County had to come in and make similar testimony. So it happens. But the issue here is that there's no signature line on the judge of elections or minority inspector rows. There's none that have one but not the other.
We do have those, but we recommended those as full counts if there was one signature.
Okay.
So that's what we deemed the last time. So those we recommended full count. There wasn't that many of those, but these were the only ones that the only issue is the judge of elections or minority inspector signature. Yes.
Okay. And so we have either 2 judges or minority inspectors to come to speak to their ballots. And that's what we're going to start to take. Let's take that testimony and then we'll go back. And Ms. Chauncey, I'm sure we will give you a chance to go through I think it's really important to go through your entire argument. You made this similar challenges last year, so I may be familiar with parts of your argument, but I think they were helpful to the record and also to our decision making. So, but if you want to just tee up the 2 witnesses and go straight to their testimony, that would be helpful.
And just be sure to introduce yourself for our transcribed record.
I will. Thank you. Yes, good morning. My name is Shelley Chauncey. I was the authorized representative for the Delaware County Democratic Party. I'm also the solicitor for the Delaware County Democratic Party. We have been attending these provisional ballot reviews for the last several cycles now with the point of making sure that as many voters as possible have their ballots counted. We want to make sure that we eliminate any of these potential issues that have historically been problems in the past. As Ms. Winterbottom explained, this time in the full counts was a good amount of, or she said a few of the one signatures, which we dealt with in far more numbers in the last cycle. I believe there was like 47 or 50 where there were either missing both or one. This time, if they had one signature, they were recommended for full count. So those have not been challenged. There were a few other issues that were noted in the review that we ultimately decided we were not going to challenge the board's decisions. Those were issues related to the voter didn't sign in both spots, or maybe there wasn't a date or something of that nature. But I think all of them were related to a voter signature specifically. We did not challenge those decisions. We focused specifically on these 8 that were solely related to missing a judge of elections and minority inspector signature only.
Before you proceed, and this is Manley Parks, I'm the solicitor for the Board of Elections. If the only defect with the outer envelope affidavit that the voter completes on a provisional ballot is that it's undated, those are recommended counts, because
Correct.
the language of the provisional ballot section of the code actually is different than the language of the code with respect to mail-in or absentee ballots, where the dating requirement has been determined by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to be mandatory. So because the code language is different, the lack of a date on a provisional ballot, we know what day it was. It was election day. You know, you can only get one of these on election day at a polling place. Just so the record's clear, we count undated provisional ballots if the only defect is the lack of a date on the outer envelope.
And again, I'll reiterate, it is my understanding, the other solicitor for the party was the one that was present at the review. And it's my understanding from speaking to her that the issues related to the other ballots we did not challenge were specifically the voters' signatures in one or both of the spots. All right, so in the interest of expediency, I'll have the 2 witnesses that we have here, which covers, it actually covers 2 precincts and not 3. We have Bruce, is it Bicken from Radnor, 5-2. He is the judge of elections that was present that day, and he had 2 provisional ballots that were lacking both signatures. We also have Colleen Kennedy, who was the judge of elections for Upper Darby 4-7, and that was 1 ballot that was missing a signature. I do not know if those precincts had additional provisional ballots. I just know those are the numbers that we are challenging for this. Mr. Bicken, would you mind coming forward?
And just for the record, and while he's approaching, this judge of elections, Radnor 5-2, it's the voters' names are David Hopkins and Daniel G. Levin. Is that correct?
I do. I have that list on my phone. 1 second.
How about you can check later.
Yeah.
It's correct.
That's correct. That's correct.
Thank you.
I have that. We did make attempts to contact all of the voters here. We left messages for them, and if we had email addresses, we sent emails to them. We did not receive any response from the voters directly, but of course, for all of these, with the exception of 1, we received communication or responses from either the judge, minority inspector, or both. So, Mr. Bicken, if you could just take just a moment to explain to the board the circumstances surrounding the casting of the provisional ballots and any justification as to why they might be missing a signature.
Sure. We were somewhat shorthanded for this election by 4 or 5 people. But I didn't think that was, I felt we had enough poll workers that would not be a problem, given that I didn't expect to be a large turnout. Of course, I miscalculated by the fact that they don't come in one right after the other. They come in clumps and in bunches. And since we had a number of people doing several jobs, myself included, we ended up with the minority inspector being also the machine operator, And of course, I was running around, getting the people to do their provisional ballots and getting the writers to do, to move that stuff along with the, both for those and for the ballots that were spoiled. The problems here were solely of my making, and I take responsibility for them.
Thank you very much. I know it's a tough day of service and we really are grateful for your service. We're also grateful that you're here to represent these votes and to try to ensure that they're counted. Just, do you have a memory of either general or specific of handling the provisional ballots that are at issue here?
I do not.
Do you have any memory of handling provisional ballots generally? And can you describe what you did on that day with them, with respect to?
Sure. Generally, my methodology is, I try to keep it light. And I tell the voters, well, boy, you really screwed up now. You got to do it the hard way. And so we go through the writer and, prepare the provisional ballots. And then I said, you think you're done, right? You're not.
And I want to stop there for a second, just so that the record reflects this. You're talking about, you stand there at the touch writer and go through and blank out all of the, don't enter anything into it, but have to go through about 14 or plus interfaces with the voter standing next to you?
Yes. Well, I make them do all the interface.
Okay.
The machine.
Thank you.
I just tell them, I just direct them to where, particularly when they're getting set up. There's several places on the touch writer where you wouldn't think you needed another touch to move forward, but you do. And so I, prompt them on that and tell them where they're supposed to be going and, say, okay, you choose your party and, I'll step back and then they do that. And then we move on and they, I say, okay, now you've got to select a certain number of, candidates. You can select, there are, in this election, there was, 7 people running, for example, in one race, and there were like 8 people. There was 8 places to be filled. And I would explain to them what the provisions were, and then they would be the ones.
Okay, so you actually had them vote on the touch. Some judges print out the provisional blank and then have people write it in.
They vote on the machine.
Okay, thank you. So the voter would have been doing the voting. Obviously, you then wouldn't direct them on how to vote. Yes,
No.
okay. Okay, and then what happens?
And we get the ballot printed out, and then I take them back and I say, okay, now the hard work starts. And, I say, okay, you've got to fold up this and put it in the secrecy envelope, make sure you seal it. And then they do that. And I say, okay, now you got to put this in the provisional envelope and seal that. And they do that. And I say, okay, now you got to fill out all of this. I forget whether it's above or below the line, and, and then have these signatures. And so, they'll sit down and they'll start writing all that stuff out. And as long as I'm there, I can then sign it myself and as necessary. Sometimes I get called away for another problem or another provisional ballot or a spoiled ballot. And I guess there were a couple of times when I just didn't get back to that and get my signature on it.
But then just and tell me if I'm wrong, do you then collect the provisional ballots and have to do something with them so that they go down to the Board of Elections for counting?
Oh, yes, I keep all the provisional ballots in there's a big envelope for the provisional ballots, and I keep all of them in there.
Okay, and then I believe.
Those go in the bag that I'm the one who then takes them down to media.
And that provisional ballot envelope, do you seal that and sign that?
No, I have them.
No, not theirs. Sorry, the big one.
Yes, that's me.
Okay, and did you do that here? I have no record that wasn't done, and I can ask Ms. Winterbottom if you don't remember.
I assume that I did it, yes.
Ms. Winterbottom, do you know if there were any irregularities with the provisional ballots, overall collecting envelope signatures by the judges in these precincts?
You mean, was there other provisionals?
No, I mean, they take all the provisionals and they.
The microphone.
Sorry. They take all the provisionals and they stick it in whatever color envelope they have, and then they have to sign that, right?
We do have that downstairs. So when we did our first estimate, that's the bigger envelope is what we
Correct.
get that from. I don't remember, I mean, there's some that don't fill out that front. I don't know if it was Radnor 5-2.
Okay,
But we do have them downstairs.
okay. Well, and so, all right, but you have them for Radnor, I mean, you don't have any where you didn't get that envelope or you got random provisionals that we're talking about
Yeah,
here today?
Everything, when we were going through was actually, it was pretty easy and straightforward, this election. It was pretty organized.
Okay, and if you had a provisional ballot that wasn't in one of those collection envelopes, we wouldn't be talking about that right now.
Yes, no.
Okay, all right.
There was one and it was in Upper Darby, that was not in there, but it was in Upper Darby precinct and it was just one. It
And,
was not
okay,
Radnor.
and it's not on this list?
No,
It's not the Upper Darby on this list?
no,
Okay, thank you.
not that.
Sorry, Mr. Allen, did you want to?
No, it's something that's relevant. Mr. Bicken, first off, thank you for your service and your dedication to the voters. But starting with the fall election, that was the first time that we required all of the provisional ballots to be printed out on the touch writer. In other words, it requires an affirmative act on the part of the Joe to enter a code and to print out that ballot. So for us to even have these two, even without the signatures, and I understand the need to have the signature on the envelope by the judge and the minority inspector, it did require the Joe to tee that up for the voter, whether the voter is going to mark it on the touch writer, as Mr. Bicken described, or whether they're printing out one for the voter to go into a booth and mark. So we used to supply dozens and dozens of provisional and ballots, and there's more of a possibility that someone could get a hold of that, or hypothetically. But in this instance, now that we run them all on the touch writer, it's a much more efficient system, but it also requires the judge to launch that.
It's a great point. And in this case, did you launch those? Did you type in the code to start the touch writers for the provisional ballots at your precinct?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Parks.
Yeah, and just for the record, since, we have a witness, maybe you could tell us, is there any way, given what Mr. Allen described about how provisional ballots are generated, that an unsupervised voter could have conceivably gotten a hold of a provisional ballot in your precinct, printed it up, put it in a secrecy envelope, gotten a hold of the outer envelope, sealed that all up and signed it without having gone through the process under your supervision or the supervision of one other poll worker at your polling place?
Not without being armed.
Well, we don't want that to happen. So
No, I don't think, I can't imagine how, I mean, in some ways, using the touch writer, I think slowed the process down some. And for efficiency's sake, I really preferred the old system where they got the ballot, they just got another ballot and did it. And then we put that in the provisional. But, this is probably a safer way. And, no, I can't imagine how anybody would do that, because I mean, I know how many times I have to tell people when I'm getting them, both to when I was handling the scanners, and also when I do the handling them at the touch writer, how many people they have a tendency to be grabby, and they want to grab things that come popping out. So you've got to watch the tapes, and you've got to watch the ballots that get kicked back. And then you've got to watch where the buttons are, and they just want to punch those buttons, gosh darn it. And you've got to make sure that the right ones get punched.
yeah. Well, thank you. It's a lot, but it does add an extra layer of safeguard here to make sure that you're the one preparing the provisional ballot, whether you're letting them vote directly on the touch writer or you're printing it out blank and then they're voting by afterwards with a pen. So, Mr. McLean, do you have any questions?
No.
Mr. Alberts?
I do not.
Thank you again for coming down, and thank you again for your service.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, and the next witness that we have is Colleen Kennedy from Upper Darby 4-7. She is the judge of elections. And Ms. Kennedy, if you could, similar to Mr. Bicken, if you could, this is our friendly service dog, Jessie.
Yeah, beautifully behaved. I apologize. Need 1 second. Sit.
You can say it, Mr. Alberts. Jesse will not be testifying, right?
Yeah,
Good. I can attest that Josie is normally much
Josie,
more,
sorry.
much better behaved than this.
Yes.
It's a new and exciting experience for her.
If you could just explain to the board, similar to Mr. Bicken, about how, what happened and what your procedure was for casting the provisional or assisting the voters in casting the ballot.
Yes, so our process is pretty simple and we worked with a team for the past couple of years, so we're very familiar with the system. The person goes to the poll pad, which we've now had for two election cycles. When we determine that they are a person who needs to vote provisionally, they come over to the table. We keep all of the materials that one would need to start that process in our the cage area. And no provisionals are processed without my being directly involved in it. And as the previous person sort of talked about, the process now this year is that you have to use the touch reader, and I'm the only person who has the codes for that. So that's another like level of accountability. And my understanding is that both my minority inspector and myself accidentally did not sign the bottom of the envelope, and we both apologize for that. And that's our error, and it should not affect the person's vote being counted.
Thank you for coming down, and also thank you for your service.
Yeah, no problem.
It's a long day. And so, Brett, I just want to make sure, do you have recollection specifically or generally of provisional ballots being cast at your precinct?
Yes, if I recall correctly, we had either 4 or 5 provisional ballots processed during this election, and my understanding is we forgot to have signatures on one of them.
Okay, that's the only one we have recorded. I think
Okay.
that's correct. And then who, is it you or your judge who does the touch writer? I'm sorry, you were the minority inspector?
Yeah, so I'm the only person that handles the codes that we have to enter in for that equipment to be used. And so he is a witness to everything, but I'm always involved.
Okay, and then, so for those 4 or 5, you handled the
Yes.
process. And then ultimately, just at the end of the day, you handled the process of collecting them. And there weren't any that surprised you that were in the, okay.
No, if I recall correctly, every single one of them was somebody that either their ballot didn't get to them quite in time to vote by mail, or they were afraid it wasn't going to be counted. I'm pretty sure that was all of them. I might remember later, but there might have been another reason, but I'm pretty sure that was the main reason why people had to vote provisionally.
I think to Mr. Parks, the closing question really from me is what his question, so I'm stealing it from him, is there any way you think that anybody could have this voter, and here we're talking about voter Brendan Stewart could have cast that provisional ballot without your supervision?
Absolutely not. In order to do it, they would have had to use the touch reader with a code that they don't have to print out a ballot. They also, as I'm sure y'all have custody of, would have had to fill out the whole outer envelope with all of their information, and they wouldn't have had that envelope without me giving it to them. And I think there are probably other ways it wouldn't have been possible, but those are two reasons why it definitely wouldn't be possible.
Thank you. Mr. McBlain, any questions?
Do you live in Upper Darby 47?
Yes, I do.
And do you know Brendan Stewart?
I don't personally know Brendan Stewart. I do recall at least one other provisional voter that was my neighbor, but it's not Brendan Stewart.
So do you have a specific recollection of of the interaction with Brendan Stewart for casting his provisional ballot?
I don't recall specific voters, but if I recall correctly, all of the voters that we had were folks that either their ballot didn't get to them in time, or they didn't bring a full vote by mail ballot with the secrecy envelope. They were all reasons that we had to do a provisional to ensure accountability.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Alberts?
Nope, no questions.
Well, thank you very much for
Thank
your
you so much.
service and
Yeah.
coming down this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, can I ask Colleen Ms. Kennedy, one follow-up?
Absolutely.
Was there at the time, and I forgive me, I was going to ask Mr. Bicken this and I completely forgot. At any time that any of the provisional voters were in there, did anyone have any challenges against any voters who were present and their ability to vote?
No, and in fact, during other elections, we may have had more contention. This was a very calm election. Everybody happily got along and nobody had any concerns like that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I have to apologize. I'm going to have to step out of the room for a minute. We have a quorum, so I think we can proceed. If you say anything new from last year, No, I don't want to miss your testimony. I just, so that I did review our transcript from the last year's hearing on this issue. But I do need to step out to attend a court proceeding for 5 minutes. I just can't get confirmation that the person's going to cover me is going to cover me.
Okay.
So, Mr. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with recessing for 5 minutes? It will take 5 minutes.
I have no problem.
That way I can hear all your argument because I am going to take a vote.
And my argument's not going to be really, it's very, very de minimis. So
Okay, well, I apologize then. Can we recess, Sean, for 5 minutes? Thank you. because I paused you before you were going to give some remarks relating to the issue at hand. So I would appreciate if you'd proceed.
Yes, so I was just going to move to the remainder of the precincts that we had. I do have emails from those individual judges, in some cases judges and minority inspectors. I've provided them to Mr. Manley. I believe he's put them up there for you. I will reference the email as well as the name of the person who is the judge. The first one is Aston 1. The judge of elections is Kylie Renee. In this particular email, you see it's a 2-page stapled. At the top, you will see the original email that was sent by my assistant reaching out to them. And then below that, you will see Ms. Renee's response, who is the judge of elections. I will read that in for the record. This is for one voter. There was one provisional ballot in Aston 1. Ms. Renee replied, "Hi, Caitlin," who is my assistant. "Sorry, I missed your call." She gives some information about what she was doing and why she could not be present at the hearing today. And then she explains, "As for the missing signatures, I would not be able to know who the exact provisional voter is unless they missed filling out their name on the form. I do not recall anyone missing filling out the envelope. I make sure to double check all information on the provisional ballot envelopes before adding them to the return envelope to the county. If one of the provisionals is missing my signature, I apologize for that. I must have overlooked it, but I do make sure the voters fill out the form before I let them leave." And before I go into arguments on this one, I do want to point out we also received a response from the minority inspector, who is named Raisa Thomason, who should be right there with it. You also received that email. And this particular case was interesting because Ms. Thompson, as the minority inspector, detailed where she felt the judge of election was not competent in the procedures that needed to be followed. And she had to step in on a number of occasions to advise her on how to proceed. Which further emphasizes how this very likely was the board's mistake. She could not be present for the hearing today. She was happy to speak to me prior. And then she goes on to say the AC units were so loud in the gym where the voting was held that I was unable to hear what was said with the Joe and the folks trying to cast provisional ballots. It was so bad that I could not hear the person 5 or 6 feet away and had to stand up and lean toward the voter to hear them in order to use the poll pad. Because of that, I am unsure of the Joe's interaction with the provisional voters. I have worked with the Joe once before and found her to be ignorant of procedures and not helpful with voters who had issues. At one point, I took the instruction book down to her and showed her the rules surrounding a voter who'd brought her unopened mail-in ballot because she wanted to vote in person. I showed her that she had to spoil the mail-in ballot and send the person back to me or the majority inspector. We were working the poll pads so she could vote regularly and that she did not have to vote provisionally. She was unaware there was a form for the voter to fill out, and I helped her look for it. She was surly about the incident and reluctantly filled the form out with the voter. While that example is not concerning a provisional ballot, it gives an idea of her ignorance with procedure. As the Joe, she is responsible for closing and getting all our signatures. I asked her if she was sure I had signed everything, and she said yes. Our machine operator did not interact with voters, so there was no one to help voters with the touch writer they had to use this year, since provisional ballots were not pre-printed and all had to be printed from the touch provider. The experience did not leave one with overwhelming confidence in our overall voting process. I did not get the feeling or sense that there was any nefarious business going on, just ignorance. And I will reiterate what was stated earlier, that in order for a voter now with the new procedures, in order for a voter to obtain a provisional ballot, the judge of elections is the only person that has access to the particular code that is required on the touch writer in order to either print the ballot or to allow the voter to vote on the screen. And I did confirm with Ms. Winterbottom, these 8 ballots are present here today. They've not been opened. However, if and when they are opened, you would be able to see whether or not the voter voted on the touch writer because it would be printed out and blacked in versus handwriting, but you would also be able to see that the voter adequately filled it in by hand. So you would know that someone, most appropriately the judge who has the code, was able to access the touch writer, put in the code that is provided to the judge, and print out the ballot for them to complete. The next.
Wait, before we go into that, I don't know if anybody has any questions. I just want to say, Mr. Allen, can we refer the second, or maybe the set of emails to Pam, our training voter, what's her poll worker lead?
Pam Lairson,
So we can determine whether there's any counseling and assistance that's needed in this precinct. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions about this one? Okay, all right.
So with Chester 9-3, the judge of election is Gloria Jordan, the minority inspector is Perry Richardson. We attempted to reach out to them via email or phone. We did not receive any responses. I also attempted to locate the voter. We had no contact information for the voter in any system that I could access. I also reached out to the party leaders for that ward in Chester City as well as Chester. And I was unable to get any responses from anyone to be able to put me in contact with the voter or these poll workers. I will make general arguments that should apply to this particular precinct, but I do not have any specific evidence or testimony related to Chester 9-3. With regards, you did hear testimony from Radnor 5-2 from Mr. Bicken. And with regards to Ridley 6-1, the judge of election is Amanda McNamee. You should have her email as well. We also have a response from the minority inspector, Kelly Faraday. Amanda says she asked if we could call her back. Unfortunately, I was not able to call her yesterday, but she did respond in the email. I'm sure it was an honest mistake that we just happened to look over. We would also need to know who the ballot was for to be able to answer those questions. I will not be able to attend any hearings tomorrow because I have to be at the hospital, so I will happily answer any questions she has over the phone. And then the response from Kelly was also that she was unable to attend today. I am sure my missing signature was simply an oversight on our part. Let me know what I can do to rectify this situation. And she knew that Amanda was going to be answering as well, which states that both of them acknowledged that it was a likely oversight on their part. And any questions regarding Ridley?
No, but did we skip Upper Darby 1-5? Is that?
I'm sorry. I have my list that I was going down. I didn't have the same
Okay,
list,
thank
but
you.
yeah, we're coming to Upper Darby. All right, let's read Miss Kelly. Missing my one email, 1 second.
We all have it up here, Ms. Chauncey, if you want to copy.
Yeah. Got it. It was just stuck in. So the judge of elections was John Thompson for Upper Darby 5-1. And the minority inspector was John Laird. We did get a response from Mr. Thompson, who says the voter voted on the touch writer, and we waited for the ballot to print. I had the voter fill out the information on the provisional envelope after the ballot printed out. I folded it, put it in the envelope, sealed the envelope, and placed the sticker on it. I told the voter to call the election board and they will tell you how it went. I walked over to the minority inspector and placed the envelope on the table. He had 2 voters he was taking care of. We had a talk about provisional ballots. Not looking, I grabbed the ballot envelope and put it in the big gray envelope. I did not look or check the provisional envelope, so as the Joe, it was my fault for not doing the job right. I am hoping this does not prevent the voters' vote from counting. And I did want to reiterate, I'm also a judge of elections, so I'm very intimately familiar with how the provisional ballot process works. I do not believe it's a gray envelope. I think it is another white envelope that all of the provisional ballots envelopes go into. It's a much larger envelope than the regular outer envelope. All of them are put in. The judge of elections has the responsibility of putting the tallies of how many were printed. And in this particular case, you had to note how many were Democrats, how many were Republicans. And then the judge and the minority inspector have to sign that outer envelope as well as the inner envelopes. Miss Winterbottom testified that those envelopes are downstairs. It's likely that they signed the outside envelope at the end of the night. That's usually when I have my minority inspector sign. I signed and I think there was testimony they usually, most Joes signed the provisional actual outer envelope at the time the voter cast them. So there are opportunities for these signatures on 2 occasions. These envelopes are kept, as well as the secrecy envelopes, are kept in a central bag that are included in the totes that are provided by the machine warehouse that we pick up, the judges of elections pick up on election day. There are very strict chain of custody requirements for picking those up. If I am unable as the judge to pick up those totes, which are sealed until election day, if I'm responsible for picking up those totes and I am unable to go, I have to sign a proxy form naming the individual that is going to pick up on my behalf.
You said that you picked them up on election day, but do you mean the weekend before
Yeah.
election day?
They open the seal on election day.
Yeah,
They
you
are-
did say that, but before that, you said you picked them up on election day.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I picked mine up the Friday before, but you can pick them up on the Friday or the Saturday. It's the weekend before election day. And those totes are sealed with the envelopes and the ballots in it. The judge of election has to cut those seals on election day. The seal numbers are recorded on all of the paperwork, which further emphasizes the chain of custody that has taken place in securing those ballots. And then we keep those totes with us where we are sitting on election day when a provisional voter comes in. We pull the ballot out because there's one section they have to fill out prior to voting. They fill that section out, and then we go with them to the touch writer where, again, we as a judge have the codes that the code is put into the touch writer. I know some judges, like Mr. Bicken testified, he walks the voter through the initial setup. I do that myself through the initial setup, and I get the voter who is standing beside me to the process of them accessing their ballot. And when it comes up to the screen where you have to, it either says launch the ballot or open the ballot, I tell them I'm going to step away. They launch the ballot and they push the touch writer to vote on the screen or print it out. I have confirmed with them beforehand which they prefer. Almost all of them universally want to do it on the screen because it's easier. I step away and I leave the secrecy envelope with them, and I tell them, and this is just me with my precinct, I'm not on here, I'm just giving you the general procedures that are followed. The voter folds their ballot when it prints out, and they put it inside the secrecy envelope and seal it and go back to the judge of elections where the remainder of the form is completed. And it's sealed, their ballot is sealed inside the outer envelope. At the end of the night, like I said, the judge of elections has to count those envelopes, put into the larger envelope where the tally is taken, and the judge and minority have to sign again on the outer envelope. I do not know how, given all of these security procedures, any random voter, number one, can come into the precinct and access a touch writer without somebody knowing there's somebody suspicious going on there, because everybody has to check in before they are able to access the voting area. And if there's somebody that hasn't checked in, there are 5 to 8 people, depending on the size of the precincts, who are monitoring what's going on inside the voting area. And unless you are voting, you cannot be in that area where the touch writer is located. So there's no way that someone is going to be able to access the codes that only the judge of election has, go over to a touch writer without anybody seeing them, vote and print it out without anybody seeing it, and then get access to all 3 of those envelopes without somebody knowing that something is suspicious. It's just impossible. The chances of that happen, I will never know how it would happen. Again, Mr. Manley reiterated that the law in Pennsylvania It's very clear that if there's evidence presented to the board that this was simply an election board error and not the fault of the voter, that it is in your discretion to count those ballots. In this particular case, including with the Chester 9-3, I think the arguments regarding the procedures of how these ballots are cast eliminates any possibility that this could have been a fraudulent ballot obtained and printed and filed with the county. I would make the argument again, as I did last year, these votes are not the fault. These errors are not the fault of the voters. As Ms. Winterbottom testified, most of these mail-in ballots were attempts to cure, or provisional ballots were attempts to cure. And again, for the second time, this voter who has clearly made the attempt to try to vote, would be disenfranchised by not having their vote counted. They have taken the step not only to do the mail-in ballot and have an error. When they were notified, they attempted to cure it by attempting to vote a second time. And so it would eliminate their ability to have this vote count, would just be clear disenfranchisement on their part. Happy to answer any additional questions.
Thank you, Ms. Chelsea. I do want to clear up one thing, just because I think you may have said it backwards, or we may have it on here wrong. I think you said Upper Darby 5-1. Is it 1-5? I'm pretty sure you said 5-1, so I just want to make sure it's one.
Let me,
It is, Ms. Winterbottom is shaking her head.
1-5, sorry.
Okay,
I
I
have it
just want to
listed.
make sure the record
Sorry.
reflects the accurate, I don't have any questions at this time. Mr. McLean?
What is the standard of proof in this hearing for the board to approve any of the challenges?
Mr. Solicitor, do you want to answer that?
I think it's indicia of non.
Well, I think it would be a standard civil standard of proof for this. It's not clear and convincing or beyond a reasonable doubt or something like that. I think it's the preponderance of the evidence standard, if that's what you're asking. And that's a matter for each of you individually to determine, is as if you were a judge on the bench hearing a bench trial.
But sorry, it's a good question. And the preponderance of what evidence? Because I think last time we haven't had a chance to hear your argument. There was the whole weight on the side of making sure that the voter is eligible, and then the piece of the additional signatures, while you pointed out, is in the statute listed. The question is, what is the emphasis here?
Right. So a couple of things. The evidence, to answer the specific question, the evidence is what you deem to be credible evidence. There is no rules of evidence, either the Pennsylvania version, the federal version, or any administrative agency version of that here applicable to this proceeding. It's what you deem based on your own personal judgment and experience to be credible evidence. There are competing considerations in Pennsylvania law that you must balance. One of them is to honor the requirements of the code, but an equally important consideration is to not disenfranchise voters who have cast a ballot that is of real viable ballot that could be thrown out simply based on not the voter's error, but an error of a poll worker. So the law has less mercy, and understandably so, for a voter's error than for an error that the voter had no responsibility for, like a judge of elections or a minority inspector simply not doing their job right and failing to sign where they must sign. There's nothing the voter can do about that.
Right, but so it's evidence that the voter.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, for the record, we have the court reporter online.
Thanks for noting that.
Thank you. It's the evidence. So the goal here is to determine, one, that Ms. Winterbottom already runs through a long series of checks to make sure that the voter is eligible, hasn't voted a second time, and there's no other indicia of voter fraud.
Yes.
And so then the signatures are supposed to support the legitimacy of that vote under the law. Is that or what is the intention?
I can't speak to the legislator's intention when they adopted these rules, probably in the 50s or whenever this provision first came into being in its current form. But logically, you would presume that the reason for the requirement that there be election officials signing these provisional ballots is to demonstrate that this was some authorized act during the operation of the polling place on election day, and someone didn't get a hold of some of these ballot materials and fill them out, before or after election day, and somehow get them back to the Board of Elections to be counted as if they're potentially valid ballots. So I think that's the big picture here. To that end, I would note that it may be worth, at least for the two ballots where we don't have testimony or a statement from the judge of elections via email or from the minority inspector via email, it may be worth making a vote that is subject to Ms. Winterbottom's team going back and looking at the outer envelope. Because if these ballots were returned in the outer envelope, and Ms. Winterbottom said they all were, and those outer envelopes were signed by the judge and the minority inspector as the rules require, and these ballots were tallied on that outer envelope, then it seems to me that the risk of the sort of mischief that the requirement in the statute seems designed to prevent goes down to zero, basically.
I personally was particularly, as you could tell from my question to the judge who wasn't able to confirm, and Ms. Winterbottom, we don't have confirmation that that they were signed on that outer envelope that collects them. Is it a complicated time consuming?
They're not receipt order, but I mean,
There's just 8 of them in there, or?
no,
There's one box for the whole county.
Okay.
28.
If while we're talking, if you wouldn't mind, I'd rather take a non-provisional vote, and I'm leaning towards this being a really critical. Or
It would be Chester City 9-3.
certainly helpful. I don't know if
is
it's
the-
critical yet.
Okay.
Okay, but I interrupted.
There are 2 ballots for nine.
I'm done. I don't have.
No, I interrupted Mr. McLean.
The outer envelope.
Which is downstairs.
Right.
Okay,
They don't have any
Sorry.
ballot, these have ballots.
Right, sorry, I was wrong.
You mean the outer envelope?
The outer
For the
envelope,
whole
these
precinct
ballots
that
came in.
contains each ballot, that, like, there's 5 ballots in a precinct, that outer envelope.
Correct.
and in the meantime, I have, stopped a lawyer from.
I don't have any more questions for Ms. Chauncey. I mean, are we, is that it? I mean, are we gonna vote? I mean,
Well, I think what we did last time was we did take the motion, then we had further discussion, right? So, and in this case, it might make sense to split the voting so that we address the ones that we have some evidentiary, we'll call it evidence.
I would say there's 3 categories that we're considering here. There are the 2 precincts or the 2 ballots where we did not have any communication with the judge of elections. That's one category. There are several where we had communications with the judges of elections who say, this is obviously my error, but didn't cite a specific positive, like, yes, I know this voter. And then you have 2 where they said, oh yeah, that's George. I remember this, or this is, but here's what was happening, and I remember this moment, right? I think those are 3 clear categories. Whether we make a separate decision is different, but I would say that maybe we consider the 3 separately, or we consider them all.
We can
consider them all together.
Consider or the 6 together. How would you like to proceed?
well, I'll kick it off. I'll make a motion to deny all of the challenges.
Okay, is that the motion we want to make? That's the motion you would like.
That's the motion I've made. It's not seconded, then motion
Okay,
failed.
Then that motion fails.
I'll make a motion to accept all.
Well, okay. Can we, as the chair, I'm gonna make a different motion and it can also fail. I don't want to let your motion. I would like to make a motion to accept Aston 1, Upper Darby 1-5, Upper Darby 4-7, Radnor 5-2, both votes, and Ridley Township 6-2.
I'll second that.
6-1.
6.
Sorry.
I'll second that motion as amended by the solicitor.
Okay. All right. Do we have any discussion of that motion?
Sure, I'll kick it off. I mean, in terms of, so it's yours is everything but the 2 Chester City ones? I'm
Correct.
sorry. Okay. So first of all, we don't have the voter present for any of this. And I would very much respect Mr. Bicken and Ms. Kennedy coming in. However, both of them very specifically testified that they have no memory of handling the specific provisional ballot at issue. And while I appreciate all of the gymnastics that we went through after that to sort of reach the conclusion that in no way on God's green earth can anything other than this count because the security provisions are in effect. While I respect it at Ms. Chauncey's polling place when she's the judge of election, perhaps that's the process that she goes through. And I would very much believe her and respect that. But to me, there's just as plausible an explanation here that somebody comes in, asks for a provisional ballot, or is not either registered or not sure that they have cast that their mail-in ballot has been counted, and somebody says, great, what you need to do is cast a provisional ballot. We go through the process, and at the same time, somebody is helping and they either find the voter or determine that the mail-in ballot was received. We had no evidence, in that regard. That's just as plausible an explanation. No, I don't believe that a voter sneaks over to the touch writer and prints it out, obtains the code somehow surreptitiously and prints it out. But there are many other plausible explanations for what can happen here. And ultimately, again, if a judge of election were to come in my opinion, and say, I do remember, Ebony Williams coming in, and I do remember the circumstances of that, and I forgot to sign it. That's to me the type of circumstance that would call for upholding the challenge. But that's not what we have. And the signatures are there for a reason. We don't draw the lines as to where signatures ought to be or dates ought to be. The courts do that and the legislature does it. And it's our job to enforce that. And as we just saw by the Supreme Court ruling in regards to the dates, they give meaning to what the legislature puts in the act. So if it requires the signature of the judge of election or the minority inspector, and it's not there, it shouldn't be counted unless we receive, in my view, convincing evidence otherwise. And here, Ms. Chauncey's done a lot of work to try to get these things here. I understand that and I appreciate it. But in my view, we have not received those. And, and in some of these situations, again, where people don't come in, the voter doesn't come in, the judge of election doesn't come in, the minority inspector doesn't come in. And we're just going to make the assumption that, hey, if a provisional ballot was printed out, it must have been okay. That's what we're really talking about here. And that's not what the law says. So that's why I do not support. I appreciate the effort to try to have everybody's ballot counted, but if we're not going to enforce the law, if we're not going to go up to the lines that were drawn for us by the legislature and the courts, then we're going to have a problem, and we're going to be here in November for days and days and days. If we don't just follow the rules. So that's my view of the world on this.
Might I ask a follow-up question? I don't know if it's out of order or improper.
Go.
If we pull the outer envelope and there is a judge of elections and minority inspector signature on the outer envelope where these ballots were sealed, would that change your position on whether or not these, or at least some of these votes?
It's supposed to be on there. I mean, to me, again, that I don't know the legislative intent, but I mean, to me, having the judge and the minority inspector sign it is an indication of, to me, that's one of the last official acts. I mean, that's what's on the outside. And, that means that, we've done everything, this is what we're okaying and we're putting it in there. Again, as we're making up plausible things here, it's like I said, it's just as plausible that during the course of this, somebody checked, the touch writer again and says, oh, well, you're not, Gene, Jean Smith, you're Gene, Gene Smith, that we have in there. And now we found you and you can vote. And so now this is all filled out. The judge of election says, well, it's filled out, but I don't need it. I'm just going to put it in the bag because I don't know what else to do with it.
So Ms.
Because
Winterbottom,
unless I'm confused, unless I'm wrong, we don't have a separate envelope marked spoiled provisional ballots.
so we do.
We do.
No, okay.
And Ms. Winterbottom stated in her statements that all of these ballots were checked to determine whether or not these individuals' mail-in ballot was eventually counted or not, and they were checked to determine if they were allowed to go back. And I believe she testified that the 72 no counts were either there was no ballot in it, the ballot was voided, or the ballot was spoiled. And so those were already not counted. So those additional checks were put in place to ensure that that wasn't happening. But I definitely understand your
Like I said, again, in my opinion, it may not be that explanation, but there's other plausible explanations for it. And if you're going to have a rule, I mean, the rule's there for whatever reason.
I mean, respectfully, I disagree. I think what you're really requiring then is for the voter to come testify that their judge must have made a mistake or the minority inspector must have made a mistake, because at this point, all of the checks have been made to make sure that there's no fraud, that the voter's not voting twice, that they're eligible to vote. There have been multiple, I mean, it's a really hard job being a Joe and a minority inspector. And I wish we could have the legislature simplify that a little bit. I mean, as we know from the 2 signatures of the voter alone, that's a major barrier to some people having their votes counted, and luckily less and less over the years, because we've made it more obvious what's required with the bolding and other things. But I'm not willing to stand on a level of evidence that the only evidence I could have is the voter actually coming in to support their vote, because they, from the position where the voter is, they have taken the action to make that vote. They've gone, they filled out the provisional, they're eligible, all the different things have been cleared. So if we do have from, just to lay it out there, so everybody's aware, if we do have the envelope signed from Chester City 9-3, that was, I do think it was probably critical, or at least super important to my decision last year on this very same issue, because it shows that the judge is collecting the provisionals and presumably, I don't want to presume anything, is certifying on that envelope that those are the provisionals that were cast in their precinct that day. So I'm in favor of this motion, and we're waiting to see. That's why I wanted to separate out the Chester City ones for the other motion. Mr. Alberts, did you have comment?
Oh, yeah.
Questions?
So I would go even further. I mean, I think if we're looking at preponderance of evidence, we're looking at words like plausible, which I understand when someone else says plausible, sometimes you think it's carrying a lot more weight, and, we can disagree on what's plausible or not plausible, but there are so many steps here where, the materials and the code are held by the judge of election or, potentially by other sworn election board members to even print this ballot, right? To even get to the point where we print this ballot from the touch writer and provide it to a voter. I don't think it's plausible that a voter can get a hold of it on their own. I think there has to be some level of collusion with an election board. And if this was some kind of attempted fraud, you wouldn't see one-offs. You'd see like a cluster of these in a particular precinct.
Or you wouldn't see legitimate voters.
You wouldn't see legitimate voters. You would see all
checks.
kinds of other problems here. And in terms of like, if they've signed each place, I think, I mean, you got to think about what election board members are. They have a ministerial role in assuring that a qualified elector can cast a vote and to make sure that we're doing this so within the rules. These ballots were signed by a qualified elector twice. We know they're qualified electors. We know that they signed their affidavit of residency. They signed, yes, I'm voting it. They went into a larger bag that was signed. We're checking in the case of these Chester ones, but they were signed by election officials and brought to the wharf with other materials in sealed bags. There's a clear chain of custody of the materials. I think the idea that these ballots are not valid in any way is an extraordinary claim. I've not seen extraordinary evidence that would, back up such a claim. I think the whole point of a provisional ballot is we're not sure if this person is entitled to vote. In these cases, the identity, their eligibility, their intent to vote, it's all clear. I don't see any reason why we would not count these. I don't see a plausible way that they would make it this far past all of our processes and them somehow being not a legitimate vote. I don't know what the argument would be otherwise. So for me, I feel like it does meet, my definition of a preponderance of evidence, and that's my take on it.
And I just don't want to have a standard where the voter has to come in after doing all of those steps.
Yeah, I think that's unreasonable.
Yeah.
I think that I've heard a reasonable argument presented by Ms. Chauncey. I've heard explanations from our staff at the voter registration warehouse that they've done their due diligence on these before we even get to this point. And I think that, having served as judge of election, having been in the fray of this, if these things made it into an envelope and were sealed by the judge, I mean, the whole point of this is that they've left, they're signing it to say that I'm the one who sealed this envelope. Really, that's all they're really saying. If a ballot is in there and it comes to us and it's signed by a qualified elector, that's the point, right? We're trying to determine if they're a qualified elector. We've determined this.
And if I might add, in addition to the outer envelope that is signed, the judge of elections and the other individuals at the boards take an oath and sign that they are going to ensure to uphold the integrity of these elections. And after the votes are tallied on the outer envelope, that outer envelope is put into the tote bag, which is also sealed with a tag and brought to voter reg up here in media. So I definitely understand where Mr. McBlain is coming from and following the rules. And I agree 100%. And if I can say anything, I think that needs to be a point in bold red letters, like some of the other items in the training manual, that you have to sign this. Don't forget, or you're going to be dragged into a hearing because Ms. Chauncey is going to drag you in there, right? I mean, make it very clear. And
Perhaps not even show up to the meeting or not even respond to an email. And you're
right,
still banned.
exactly.
I would just say one thing about that, and I think, it's a worthwhile consideration, but basically everything in that manual is important. The problem is that all of it's essential. And that's the great challenge for any judge of elections or any poll worker is, if they don't do a step of the process, whether it's in opening the polls or the way they're handling the voters or the numbered list or a provisional ballot and all the different things they're supposed to do. If they get one thing wrong, then that becomes important and that could disenfranchise a voter. And then you end up with a whole book that's in 20-point large red, underlined, highlighted emphasis, and with all emphasis, then there's no emphasis. So I understand that, but there is a challenge here that so many things are important that if you highlight them all, then nothing stands out anymore.
And I just want to respond to that because I think that what you just pointed out, they're all important. We have so many safeguards in place. And I think the reason why we have so many redundancies and so many multiple safeguards in place is that we have to account for human error. These are human beings who do this twice a year. They're not professionals. They're going to make mistakes. And I don't think that the weight of that lies on the voters' shoulders.
And the case law has been very clear that when
What case that pertains to this issue? Is there a case?
there is a case, I think Mr. Manley has it written down. I apologize. I didn't write it down.
Here, I mean, is this the Delaware County Democratic Party and the board against
No.
people of Delaware County? I mean, why even have a hearing? Why did we even have a hearing this morning when we have no witnesses in some of these cases, and the only two witnesses that were presented have no recollection of these provisional ballots and presented no testimony about whether or not whatever happened to these ballots. They just said, I must have made a mistake. Why even have a hearing? I mean, Madam Chair, you're an attorney. You just participated in the judicial proceeding. Why have a hearing when we're not going to present any evidence for any of these? I mean, we're considering the two Chester ones. We have no evidence whatsoever as to what happened.
Well, we've received ballots signed by voters. So that's a piece of evidence right there.
This goes to the question I was asking Mr. Parks. The evidence is not that the voter is voting legitimately and it's non-fraudulent ballot. Those are the checks and balances. The statute has this provision. The case law, I assume, I mean, you're going to pull it up, says, and that it favors franchising the voter.
Yeah, I've looked at this issue multiple times. I've done memos to the board about it over the years. I'll see if I can find the case law, but I'm confident that the case law says that if the issue with the ballot is solely due to the board and the error of a poll worker and not the voter, that ballot can be counted.
You have
and-
no evidence that there was an error by the poll worker.
Well,
Again, in
I'm
every
not
one of these
debating the
situations,
evidence.
It could be just as plausible that the voter changed their
Yeah,
mind.
I'm not debating the evidence. That's for you guys to determine. I'm not going to take a
I'm saying
position
there is
on
no
that.
evidence to condemn.
That's fine. I understand. I'm just saying the law on this is quite clear. I'll see if I can get the case for everybody's benefit, but the standard is, there's no question about that.
I mean,
For you to apply the
I
facts.
believe that we have evidence. It doesn't need to be beyond a reasonable doubt on the 6th. And additionally, for Chester, we're waiting to see if we have evidence that the poll worker, the Joe, closed up the process with their signature on the very envelope that contained these ballots. So I would consider that. So why don't we find out what we do have? It looks like we have those collected.
So
Why don't we stipulate that the judge of election return the materials to us? And by returning the materials to us,
that's a little
submit
further
it with
than
his
that.
oath. I mean, how far do we go? Because he returned the materials to us, that means everything is attested to? I mean, you're way, way, way down the rabbit hole.
Can we, Mr. Allen, can we look at those envelopes?
yes, in 2 instances, Chester City 9-3, where I know there were considerable problems, there's no signature on here at all. In Upper Darby 4-7, there's no signature on the outside return envelope, not the return envelope for the individual provisional, but the ones that they provided.
And Upper Darby 4-7 is where we had
And
Ms.
the-
Kennedy.
Colleen Travis Kennedy show up and testify here.
Well, I certainly found Ms. Kennedy credible on the notion that these provisional ballots were among the ones that she carried out but this is,
Okay, for the record, the case law is in re contest of 1979 general election for office of District Attorney of Washington County. It's a Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision from 1980 and held both election code and pertinent case law reflect a policy of protecting the franchise where the voter's intent can be determined and where any minor non-compliance with statutory requirements is not the fault of the voter.
And with all due respect, Mr. Parks, I mean, we just had a Supreme Court case that went through federal courts, also the same issue. And our Supreme Court made the determination that dates and signatures are important if that's there. Yes, the law is generally that we don't want to disenfranchise the voter, but also the courts have said right alongside of that is that you don't ignore the rules.
But those were voter signatures and dates. That's a different matter, right?
I mean, and again, and Mr. Alberts, and again, if they came in, if Miss Kennedy had come in here today and indicated that, sure, I know Brendan Stewart. I remember Brendan came up, he wasn't in the book. And we did a provisional ballot for him and that was it. We checked to make sure that his mail-in, wasn't counted. And we checked the book again, the poll pad, and made sure we called media, we called Chester, and we did all those things and it was good. And I just didn't sign it apparently, but I remember that. I would vote for that. I would vote to uphold that, but respectfully, you don't have that here today. And if, she didn't remember him. She doesn't know who he is. She doesn't remember the circumstance of it. Anything could have happened. We're being asked to guess. And I understand, the desire to count it, but respectfully, I think you're arguing backwards. Prove that it's not valid. And that's not what the law is. That's not the reason that we have these hearings. The reason is to adjudicate the challenge. And respectfully here, there's just no evidence to the two specific people that we had come in and present us with evidence. They just didn't remember. They were honest about it. I appreciate them coming in, Mr. Bicken and Ms. Kennedy. I mean, I'm sure they probably, could have made it easy and just said, yeah, I remember that guy. But they didn't. They were honest. And we just don't have the evidence of that. And then even with the emails, which again, you want to argue about whether or not they're evidence or not, the people don't remember. They don't have a recollection on these things.
Well, the two emails, they do.
Yeah.
specifically do.
Well, look, I mean, the judge of elections' job is to be able, and we've argued about this with Chester Heights, making sure that the judge of elections has sight and control over their entire location during the carrying out of the process. Ms. Kennedy said that she carried out the process. She's familiar with the provisional ballot voting. She could see at all times, and there's no way that this could have happened. The other judge said the same thing, that that's their job. That's the oath they take, is to make sure that that there's no nefarious action happening under their purview. And so with all that, I'm ready to take a vote on the six that are presented by the current motion. So are we ready to take that vote?
Sure.
All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
That motion carries by 2-1. Now we have the more complicated one. I mean, I do have some concerns about the fact that I am struggling with the fact that this envelope isn't signed. I do think we have all the other safeguards that lead to it. So I struggle with whether or not that's a critical failing or not. So what I did do is I did look to make sure that we have, that we have other indicia, along with what Ms. Winterbottom has done in terms of making sure that the voter is legitimate. And the concern I have that we have John Fryer and we have Derek Boyd. Those are Derek Bird, sorry. Those are the two that
And these are qualified voters who have signed their ballots, which was returned by the judge of elections in a sealed green tote.
yeah, no, I'll
Envelope inside the tote, they forgot to sign. That, I mean, by any definition, would have to be election board error and not the voter's error.
I do think that where we come out on this issue, Mr. McBlain and all the concerns here do require, and I think the two who spoke today are well aware now of the signature requirement. I do think, though, that the remainder, particularly in Chester, needs to be followed up with Mr. Allen on their obligations. I mean, it's concerning that they would.
It would be preferable if they did, if they followed the
It's not
procedures,
right
of
to the
course.
voter. So last time I know how I voted in favor of counting them.
Yep. I would make a motion to count the two ballots from Chester City 9-3.
Okay, I'll second that motion. Are we ready to proceed on that vote?
Sure.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
That motion carries 2-1. Thank you, Ms. Chauncey.
Thank you for your time this morning. And I did want to say a moment of appreciation for the board for taking the time to consider this, and also to Ms. Winterbottom and her staff. They are very informative. They are very open to making sure that party leaders are present and able to be present for the review. And I think going through these processes, which is delineated in the statute, is doing more for the process than just allowing these 8 votes to count. I think it's ensuring that these election boards are being held accountable for ensuring that they are doing their job. And I will note that none of these ballots were repeats of November. So that was the first thing that I checked. And again, thank you for allowing me to be here this morning and participate.
Yeah, I think that we need to make sure, though, that these particular boards have some counseling, the ones that have not had that opportunity today to hear this argument.
Yeah, I think that point is very well made, and I do think we want these people to get them right. So. let's make sure
The
we get them
first
right.
step might be to make them watch this hearing and see what happens on the back end so they understand the importance of what they do on the front end.
Is it in our power to order people to watch a video?
We can include it in the training process.
All right. But I do think, yes, Mr. Allen, thank you very much for doing that. I think we now are at the step where we need to authorize Mr. Allen to sign and report unofficial election results to the Department of State. Is there a motion to authorize Mr. Allen to do so?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, is there any need for discussion? No. Okay, then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
None opposed, that motion carries. Mr. Allen, do we have any potential recounts or close contests?
Currently, we do not. We are still going through the write-in results to determine whether or not there are any possible candidates for precinct level committee man or committee woman elections in the Republican Party, But so far, we have no signs of any kind of close contest, either statewide or on the local level.
And once we post the unofficial write-in results, there's a clock that starts for petitions accumulation and such.
Yes, we have already posted to the website the petition to accumulate, so that's ready. We've also given it out upon request to a couple of candidates who anticipate accumulating. We anticipate wrapping up and posting the write-in results sometime Wednesday, either middle of the day or by the end of the day Wednesday. But then the accumulation petition needs to be submitted to the Board of Elections, either by email or in person by 4 p.m. this Friday. That's May the 3rd. So that it may be considered at the certification meeting next week.
And then we're the ones who will vote to approve or not on those petitions. Is that correct? Or
Yes.
That is correct.
Is that the statutory deadline? I mean, because we were talking about perhaps Wednesday night, the write-ins being posted. And then we only have 48 hours to file petitions to accumulate.
I believe the statute is silent on that. We're trying to make sure that we have, for the sake of good order, if we have to review whether that petition is legitimate or not, whether that petitioner is actually a registered voter where they claim to be a registered voter, we need a little bit of time ahead of the Tuesday morning certification meeting. So that's the thought behind it. If you're asking if we can extend that to perhaps Sunday at noon or Sunday at 4 p.m., I'd be more than happy to consider that, to give
Well, I'm just saying, I'm asking, I don't know. Is that,
Right.
like I said, is that a statutory? I don't remember there being a 48 hours other than, again, the local committee person, when you're talking about 5 or that's,
Right.
there are at least a couple, if not 3, I'm not sure, state legislature races where,
that's, I think, the ones with all, yeah.
where there may be petitions to accumulate. I don't know.
we've been in
And that
touch with.
you might need a little bit longer than a day and a half business,
Well, I mean, it's a matter of filling out the form. So we provide all the variations of a name. So one candidate, Jones, comes to mind, for example. So it may come in the first initial Jones. It might come in the full first name Jones. It may come in with a middle name as well, or Junior or whatever. So they just simply have to fill out the form saying, I want these 10 votes for J. Jones, John Jones, the 12 votes for John O. Jones, what have you, to be accumulated. So we've made every candidate who has inquired aware of the timetable. We have not received any, this is too tight. But again, I'm more than happy to open it up. I just want to make sure that we have time on Monday before we certify to check to make sure these are registered voters where they say they claim to be, and that the numbers that they're putting together are legit. So, we can reduce our time frame to 24 hours or less, but we can make it to Sunday if you want. We can extend that.
I want to do whatever the statute wants.
Is there a statute governing this?
I am looking to see if the code has a deadline on a petition to accumulate.
All right. Well, if it does, let's carry that through. Obviously, you would. I know, Mr. Allen, and if it doesn't, then I guess we'll be generous if anybody asks for additional time.
But just for the record, I have communicated all of this with party leaders as well as the form to accumulate. I think you were on the email as well. So.
And it's a simple form. It's just going through the unofficial results and identifying all of the potential variations of your name as.
Well, after the provisional hearing, I'm
right?
afraid to call any form simple. So.
Yeah, right. Is May 7th, how close is May 7th to the certification deadline?
The certification deadline is Monday, the 13th.
So if somebody requested additional time, you'll let us know.
Yes.
Like we could punt on a particular race. We're going to certify everything but this contest and then convene on a later date if absolutely necessary. Is that?
I defer to legal counsel as well as the board to make that determination for for the sake of good order, I like to certify everything all at once.
Sure. Well,
But either way, there's time, not that it's convenient. I mean, we want to get this done and we aim to get it done ahead of time so that we don't miss any deadlines, obviously. But there is a little bit of room in the calendar if someone came in and said, I don't have time to complete my petition.
Yes, to the degree that the board would want to recess and then reconvene after that.
well, my concern is more of if there is a specific window of time allotted by statute, as per John's concern, then I want to make sure we give ourselves time to accommodate that. That's all. If people find it convenient or less convenient, I'm less interested. I'm just, where are the goalposts?
We're waiting for that, right? So, all right. So if there's any concerns ultimately when Mr. Parks determines the goalposts, please let us know, Mr. Allen, if we have to discuss a new date.
Okay.
I'm assuming that we're not going to run into that issue based on your earlier communications to everybody, making them aware.
Okay.
Okay. All right. All right. The next meeting date is May 7th, 2024 for certification. And does anybody have anything else? Then with that, we are adjourned and I don't see a voter reg meeting. So thank you very much, Ms. Winterbottom. Thank you both.